Thank you so much for being with us. It is the evening edition. It's 9:33. Time for our newsmaker interview now. And tonight it's the British cardiologist Dr Asseem Malhotra, who was recently appointed senior advisor to the US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., making him one of the most powerful Britons close to Trump's administration. Malhotra has made various disputed claims about heart disease, but most contentiously is now calling for the mRNA vaccine to be suspended, saying it does more harm than good. Reform UK have made him their chief medical advisor, and he'll be speaking at their party conference this weekend. He gave us a first look at his conference message.
So actually the title of my talk is How to Make Britain Healthy Again.
I wonder where you got that from.
Well, they actually asked me what would you like to discuss, or what do you think would be good? And I thought, obviously, considering that I've had a role to play in the the movement in America with Make America Healthy Again, I thought that would be ideal. But also it reflects essentially my advocacy work and research going back probably a good 15 years.
What is going to make the headlines, do you think?
Wow, I suppose there's lots of different potential headlines. I think that, the theme really, I think the elephant in the room, Kay, that hasn't been addressed is the fact that medical knowledge is under commercial control, but most doctors don't know that. Okay,
explain what you mean, and then we'll dig into that.
So I am someone that is obsessed with two things, which I think is what patients and the public want in their doctors: evidence and ethics. And when I give my lectures, and I'm going to put this slide up, I think it's one of the most interesting, important slides that I've used in my lectures around the world. It's called the Evidence-Based Medicine Triad. And it's a very elegant analytical framework for teaching and practicing medicine. And the purpose of that triad is to improve patient outcomes. So relieve suffering, manage risks, and treating illness. And there are three components, which I think is quite easy for people to get their head around. They are individual clinical expertise, as a doctor, your clinical intuition, your knowledge, etc. The best available evidence on whether it's a surgical procedure, whether it's prescribing a drug, whether it's a lifestyle. And last but not least, the most important, is taking into consideration individual patient preferences and values. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out if there's anything wrong with one or several of those components. At best, you're going to get suboptimal outcomes for your patients, and at worst, you're going to do harm.
And I don't think many physicians are going to disagree with the principle of that, are they?
Not at all. But this is where the issue lies, is when you look at best available evidence, and I cite I would call him the Stephen Hawking of medicine. He's called Professor John Ioannidis at Stanford. The reason I call him Stephen Hawking of medicine, he's the most cited medical researcher in the world. He is an expert in data analysis, scientific integrity. And he published a paper in 2017, which and again, it's something I'm going to bring up in my lecture, called How to Survive the Medical Misinformation Mess. And he makes a point that most medical research is unreliable, not useful for policymakers, and is unhelpful to patients. And he says 20 to 50% of all, I know this is the US, but these are relevant to the UK as well, 20 to 50% of all healthcare activity in the United States, and they spend over $4 trillion in healthcare per year, brings no benefit to the patient, is wasteful or harmful. Think about that, it's quite a lot. And the reason he says is because most of the research behind clinical decision-making is essentially unreliable, because it is one of the main reasons it's under the control of the drug companies.
Okay, so let's just take your average. Yeah. And this is in America or in the UK or both?
It's all around the world.
Okay.
It's all around the world.
So let's just take a research facility at a university in the UK, and we can probably name several between us. You're saying they are under the influence of Big Pharma?
Yeah, and it's not like
because they're going to dispute that, aren't they?
Yeah, it's not. Well, let me explain how this works. So we take a step back. Let's go a bit more further upstream. When we prescribe drugs in medicine, there are processes that happen. There are publications in medical journals. There are approval by regulators. Okay. Now, those trials that are done are invariably designed by the drug companies, and often these trials, these randomized trials, these sort of high quality level of evidence trials, they involve thousands and thousands of patients, and those trials can go on for several years, and the data on those trials is often tens of thousands of pages. What they do is, the drug companies, and this is something that isn't very well known, even before the trial starts on this product they think is going to be beneficial, they're already deciding what their marketing strategy is. So there's already a bias introduced. They then design the trial, and they design the trial in a way, so there's so many ways of biasing the results, of a way that is going to likely give them the best results. And sometimes that can mean that they choose certain participants in the trial that are less likely to get side effects. Then what happens is the summary results are then given to the regulators, who then make a decision on whether or not to approve the drug. And so that means most of the time, they do not look at all of the data. They just trust what they're given by the drug companies. Now, the drug companies, their legal obligation is to produce profit for shareholders. They don't actually have a legal obligation to give you the best treatment. But let me just
can I just step in and just ask, aren't many of those drug companies informed? Don't they use the basis of the product that they're about to produce? The very start of that, the very embryo of that, comes from medical research conducted by independent research facilities, university-based research facilities. And what the drug company does is it takes a technology, maybe it buys a technology, and then it creates a drug, and it obviously then is interested in marketing that drug to sell to the NHS. And it's a whole minefield in the United States, because obviously it is heavily commercialised in the United States, and that's where it gets difficult. But isn't the basis of that drug, the science behind it, doesn't that, at its very core, the very understanding of how that drug works, and we can take vaccines as the example, if we like, doesn't that come from reputable scientists?
That's a very good
education establishments, centres of learning.
That's a very good question, and that is the conventional perception and wisdom. And yes, that is true, but you don't know actually whether your product or what you've discovered is actually going to work until you put it through a clinical trial. So on that point, Kay, I think there is a misconception out there, first of all, that medicine is an exact science, and it's not. It's an applied science. It's a science of human beings. Social science is constantly evolving.
So you would question the journey from the science at the start to the chemist, effectively, of those drugs. And I want to return back to what you're going to say at conference, because the kind of overarching interpretation I have of that is you want to open people's eyes to something you think that they should be aware of. And again, I'm going to point out here that you'll probably get into trouble with lots of institutions for saying this. Pharma won't like that you're saying this. You're used to causing trouble. You're completely aware of that. What you're going to try and educate reform supporters, people at that conference at the weekend too, is people will say that you're trying to sow mistrust into the system. You'll say that you're trying to open people's eyes to it and make them aware. But health is really tricky, isn't it? Health's a really, really emotive, personal area to lots of people.
Yes.
And you'll have to be careful with what you say. And obviously that'll be down to the people who interpret it. How do you answer those questions that actually you are feeding people who are looking for those stories, not who are approaching them with an open mind?
I mean, that's going to happen inevitably anyway, Kate. We can't control what people think. My job as a doctor is to try and make sure that we optimize outcomes for patients, for society, for the NHS. And what I do is also always make sure I stick to the evidence and cite reputable sources.
We've seen what's happening in the United States with vaccines, stepping away from a vaccine mandate in Florida, including mandated vaccination of children, the announcement to cut funding to mRNA vaccines like the COVID jab. That is the proposal from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What are you going to be telling the conference about vaccines? Because this is a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah, it is. So interestingly, my connection with Robert Kennedy Jr. started after I published a peer-reviewed research paper in the Journal of Insulin Resistance at the end of 2022, where I actually called for a moratorium on the COVID mRNA vaccines. And that's how we started a conversation. He read my paper. I think I'd gone on GB News to talk about it, and he called me literally straight after. But
Can I ask you what your problem is? And I'm going to ask you to just explain this as simply as you can. What is your issue with the COVID mRNA vaccine?
I'm glad you asked it. Very simple. I'm not going to overcomplicate stuff. All you need to do is go back to ground zero. So do you remember at the beginning we talked about the fact that there's this commercial influence over medical research? Historically, there have been occasions where independent researchers have been able to reanalyze some of that data. This actually happened with the COVID mRNA vaccines. Published in the journal Vaccine, summer of 2022, going back to the beginning. So these are the trials done by Moderna and Pfizer, and they were reanalyzed by very eminent scientists, including the associate editor of the British Medical Journal, Peter Doshi. And what did they find when you go back to the beginning? This is what led to the approval. Coercion, unfortunately, mandates for many people, is that you were 2 to 4 times more likely to suffer serious adverse effect from the COVID mRNA vaccine. That means disability, life-changing event, or hospitalization, okay, than you were to be hospitalized with COVID. And this is interesting, this is important, Kate, because recently this has been probably the most important bit of research that has been used in the United States for Robert Kennedy Jr. and HHS saying that we're not going to invest, we're going to ban the investment in this technology. What that means, and this is for me, and there's lots of other data, I'm not going to bore you with it, but when we start from the beginning, it does give the suggestion, Kate, and I'm sure eventually this will come out. I've got a strong conviction on this because I've looked at this data in detail and managed patients and looked at all the different bits of information coming out. It probably, if we'd had an independent review of the data at the beginning, as in the MHLRA that gets 86% of its funding from pharma, which is a problem, and of course it was a rush. We can understand why it happened. It probably may not have been given to a single human being in the first place because it was going to do more harm than good. Kennedy knows that. People inside HHS know that. Historically, I had to do months of research into this and also make a U-turn. I must mention this. It wasn't easy for me to do that. I was in February 2021, I was on Good Morning Britain, having had 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, encouraging high-risk people, elderly, people from baby communities to take it. So for me to change my mind was not easy. But once I looked at it, I was like, okay, there's a problem here. And because of my history in looking at the whole issue of Big Pharma and calling for inquiries through the Daily Mail, through the Guardian, through the Eye newspaper, going to the European Parliament, way before the pandemic, the penny dropped for me. I was like, we've been here before. So what that means is that it is that highly likely, well, certainly here, and this is accurate, you can look this up. When I did my research, the MHRA itself published, we have a yellow card scheme in this country. And certainly by mid-2022, by the end of 2021, there were 500,000 reports on the yellow card scheme of what, I'm not saying serious, we don't know how many were serious, but more than mild adverse effects that were reported. Now, when you break down the serious adverse events, you look in America, hundreds of thousands of people thought they've been seriously vaccine injured. The traditional, and this comes from the UK, these are scientists in the UK who have published on this. They said that essentially what is reported is usually an underestimate of serious adverse effects by 10-fold. So we are likely dealing with millions of people, that have been vaccine injured, so that's an issue, certainly in the US, and probably here. But the other issue, Kate, and this is going to come out in my talk, is that we've now got concerns, because I speak with people behind the scenes in America of what's going on. It's almost a moot point about the COVID vaccine in terms of getting it banned. And we've got, a petition in this country with hundreds of doctors have signed around the world, thousands of people calling for moratorium. So it's not just me on my own. The issue is this, and I bring this personally as well, is that there is evidence now, hundreds of studies done that show harms of the mRNA vaccines, that there are probably people, and it's not to scare people, and we have to identify how to deal with this. There are many people who are probably asymptomatic right now, who are going around, who are in unnecessary increased risk of, say, heart disease and heart attacks, okay, because of the mRNA vaccine, and also cancer. Angus Dalgleish is this country's probably most eminent oncologist at St. George's Hospital. I spoke to him just before I came here, and I've been working with him. He's been public about this already. And he said to me, Asseem, one of my greatest concerns is we know now from studies there are at least 13 different mechanisms of how the COVID mRNA jab can cause cancer. So, Kate, I've had this, I'm worried. I've had very high intensity tests done that show that I'm even at increased risk.
I think I need to jump in here and
this is what we're going to have to deal with.
And say, this sounds scary. You sound very certain about it. It sounds scary. Yeah. But we need to add some context into here, right?
Yes.
Large swathes of the scientific community do not agree with you. Billions and billions of COVID vaccinations have now been given out. They've been given out by national health authorities, local health authorities, scientists, doctors. They've been peer-reviewed, they've been studied all over the world. And there is, for the mRNA vaccine, an acceptance that it can cause inflammation of the heart in a very small number of cases, okay? Teenage boys is one particular case. They can be particularly vulnerable to myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle, as you well know, which can be treated. But the point that needs to be made here time and time again, which was made when we had the vaccine as well, is that it's a case of lives saved versus lives lost as a result of taking the vaccine. Yes, it's not foolproof. Yes, there are side effects. Yes, people are affected. But when you talk about the number of lives saved through that vaccine, that completely dwarfs, this is the reasoning, that completely dwarfs any doubt about the vaccine itself. And if you are one of those very, very unlucky people who develop side effects as a result of taking the vaccine, then it is treatable. A vaccine's good or bad?
Safe and effective, right? Prior to the pandemic, the third most common cause of death after heart disease and cancer is prescribed, this doesn't include vaccines, prescribed medications, okay? Because of side effects, usually avoidable in large part because of the drug industry sponsored trials exaggerating the safety and benefits, okay? This doesn't include vaccines. When it comes to traditional vaccines, from the data I've seen, I still believe that they are actually amongst the safest of all medical interventions.
So those are non-mRNA vaccines?
Yes, but this mRNA technology is more like a gene therapy. It's not like traditional vaccines. And this is the thing that caught us out. When you get injected with a traditional vaccine, you get basically an antigen, a part of the virus or bacteria, a small part, and your body amounts an immune response, and then it remembers it, and therefore you're protected. What's happened here is that this new technology, unfortunately, the platform distributed the spike protein to all organ systems, and even the WHO came out with a list of potential adverse effects, and every organ system is affected, Kate. And now this happened very recently. Yale researchers were shocked to find 700 days. More than sort of around 2 years after having the mRNA vaccine, there were people who've got some of these long COVID symptoms who've got spike protein still circulating.
Okay, people are better off getting COVID than they are taking the vaccine. Just to be really clear, and I want a really simple answer because I do need to move on.
COVID is no longer, for the overwhelming majority of people, it's not a deadly disease right now.
Will it be, or will you be encouraging it to be official reform policy, should they form the next government, to drop mRNA vaccines?
Well, I think it's going to be a no-brainer anyway because of what's happening in America and around the world. I think what reform should be doing now is how do we improve the whole healthcare system? Those issues around obesity, about the food environment, about the social determinants of health, right? These are the major issues that we need to think about. And
But just to be clear,
yes,
that is something we've heard it in Florida, in the United States. Okay, no more funding for mRNA vaccines. Florida, the state of Florida, is dropping all vaccine mandates completely, including for children. Is that something that you'll be advocating for at the reform conference? Yes or no?
I'm not talking about that. But in this country, we don't mandate end vaccines unless you're in an exposed job. And actually, because we use persuasion in this country, which I think is a good thing, not coercion, we actually have better uptake. So one of the reasons in America they have a low tradition before even the pandemic, I think their figures, I can't give you the exact figures, but their uptake of childhood vaccines is much lower because there is almost like this sort of pressure. Whereas in this country, we use persuasion.
Well, our childhood rates of vaccination are dropping. They're now at their worst rate
and
in
that's
15
because,
years.
And do you know why? It's nothing to do with people being anti-vax about the COVID mRNA. And let's not misrepresent this information. This has happened because of the disastrous coercion, and even, Chris Whitty talks about mandating vaccines for healthcare workers, and he pushed it. And then the COVID inquiry, he came out and said this was a political decision. He didn't agree with it.
People are just going to hear vaccines are bad. Forget about the mRNA aspect of it. I don't think people are, when people are filtering things out, people are likely to may think, I'm being told not to trust vaccines. And you will play your part in that, and you'll be aware of that responsibility. What
I would say is that as doctors, we are taught if you make a mistake, the way to deal with it, an error, and this is I don't think we do this very well, is that first and foremost, you need to acknowledge the mistake to the patient. And the second thing is, and patients will trust you as long as they know your intentions are pure. One, you acknowledge the mistake. Two, you tell them that you're going to ensure that this never happens again, and checks and balances are going to be implemented to protect other people.
Let me ask you some quick questions. Donald Trump's health. What's happening with it?
Listen, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know. I'm not aware that he's got any major issues. Certainly, it's interesting that during COVID, I was asked by Sky News to talk about the fact when he got COVID, what was going to happen to him. And I saw his medical reports, certainly from a cardiovascular perspective, and I think they've been updated recently. He doesn't have, he's actually very healthy from a cardiovascular perspective. He doesn't have any degree of heart disease. He's taking some cholesterol-lowering pills. I don't necessarily think that that's, probably going to be, it's going to be beneficial for him. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm not aware of any major issue.
That was Dr Asseem Malhotra, the cardiologist. He is an advisor to Reform on Health, a chief medical advisor, and he's also a senior advisor to the US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. A reminder that the UK Health Security Agency states that current vaccines provide good protection against severe disease and hospitalisation. UK HSA surveillance data relating to last autumn's programme shows that those who received a COVID vaccine, were around 43% less likely to be admitted to hospital with COVID-19 from 2 weeks following vaccination compared to those who remained unvaccinated. Vaccination continues to help protect against severe illness. And the World Health Organization says COVID-19 vaccines are safe and subject to rigorous testing in clinical trials to prove that they meet internationally agreed benchmarks for safety and efficacy. This is Kait Borsay. It is the evening edition on Times Radio.